Lowe's knows how to get you ready for holiday hosting with up to 35% off select home decor. And get up to 35% off select major appliances. Plus, members get free delivery, haul away, basic installation, parts, and a 2-year Lowe's protection plan when you spend $2,500 or more on select LG major appliances. Valid through 10/1. Member offer excludes Massachusetts, Maryland, Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Florida. Installed by independent contractors. Exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for more details.
Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist. And your Bish Therapist, as you've noticed, has been MIA. So here I am to say hi, I'm okay, to explain a little bit about what's going on, and to discuss plans for the rest of the season. As many of you noticed, I just fell off the face of the planet a couple of weeks ago. And so today what I'm going to talk about is what happened to share that I'm okay. And I'm going to talk a little bit about grief and emotional health and share some tips, tricks, and strategies that I've used to get through what is arguably the most challenging month of my adult life so far. So, in September, when I put out my last episode, what I hadn't been talking about publicly was that my grandmother was dying. And so, one thing I want to say is that my grandparents, my grandfather is still alive. He's going to be 98 in 2 weeks. And unfortunately, my passed last week and she was 96. My grandparents, for me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more personally about this on my Patreon because that's one of the things that Patreon allows me to do. It's smaller, it's more intimate. So I do share a little bit more personal things. If you're interested in that, go over to Patreon. But my grandparents are basically the reason that I'm normal. Halfway normal, because who's all the way normal? And I consider myself a beautiful weirdo and I'm totally fine with that. But my grandparents and I have been very, very close my entire life. My grandfather is literally my best friend for the better part of 30 years. I've seen them one or more times a week. And, when they got older and they had to move out of their home, I took care of that, got them moved into a retirement community. And then it was time for them to move from the retirement community to a nursing home. And I had to do that by myself during the pandemic. It was a disaster. But thankfully, they've been in this place that's really wonderful and has taken really great care of them. But have seen them every week or more for the better part of 30 years. So, my grandmother, at the end of her life, she developed some heart failure and some infection and things like that. And so I had, I'm their caretaker, their POA, their, everything. I take care of all of it for them. And, listen, they've taken care of me. So it's my honor to do that. It's just a lot of hard work. And towards the end of her life, I had to make some tough decisions about putting her on hospice, which was really challenging. But, that process honestly was more amazing and helpful than I thought. So it was, at the end of the day, a beautiful thing. But the long and the short of it is that I have always been very close to my grandparents. And I knew as they were getting older, I mean, like how fortunate we all were, right? Like to be 96 and 98. I'm 44 and I still have a grandparent at this point, So I've always been very aware that they're not going to live forever, understand that, super grateful for the time that we've had. But what I realized is that A, there's no preparing to watch someone you love die. And B, it doesn't matter how old someone is. It's just like a really, really challenging process. Ironically, my Gram's birthday was in August and she celebrated her birthday. And then a couple weeks after her 96th birthday is when she passed. Um, but started happening is that I just became completely overwhelmed and overtaken by grief. And as she was dying, she had a staph infection, and I had been spending a lot of time over there with her for obvious reasons, and I ended up catching the staph infection, which normally, healthy people normally don't it is contagious, right? It definitely is contagious, and healthy people get staph for sure. But because I'm immunocompromised, I didn't even think about it. And, I'm the type of person that when someone I love is struggling, I think more about them than I do about myself, which is kind of what got me in trouble. And so I caught the staph infection from her, which started a real issue for me. My blood work was outrageous. That was not good. They weren't healing. And so the long and the short of it is that my grandmother was dying. I caught the staph infection. I realized that my blood work was really wonky and started to have to deal with CLL stuff, which, previous to that, it was just fine. Now, CLL is one of those things where it's like, chug along and then there's blips. You chug along and then there's blips. That's what it is like living with a chronic incurable cancer. There's times where I absolutely forget about it. I really do. It's the greatest joy of my life to forget about CLL when I don't have to focus on it. And so, in the midst of my grandmother dying, CLL started being an issue, blood work started being an issue, had the staph infection. And then the pièce de résistance was the week that my grandmother really decompensated. And we knew she didn't have much more time. Our contractor started ripping up our bathroom, and my house became a construction zone. And if you ask Melissa, why did you do that? I didn't do that. We hired a contractor who said that he would start in May, and then May turned into end of August, which it happens, right? So when he said he could start the week that my grandmother was dying, I just thought, how bad could it be? And boy, did I fuck around and find out how bad it could be. Because for me, with my health stuff, I have a lot of fatigue, I need a lot of sleep, and the contractor starts at 7:15. And basically, the plan was to remove walls and gut, like literally down to the studs. So this was not a quiet like remodel where we're getting the floors redone or whatever. We tore out closets, walls, all this other stuff, which, by the way, it's amazing and what a blessing it is to be able to do that, right? That's a privilege. I understand that. But the fact that this was all happening in 3 weeks of my life, honest to God, I just completely shut down. I couldn't function. I was so overwhelmed. I was sleep deprived. My emotions were all over the place. And so I just, for the first time in my life, I was like, I cannot do this podcast. And this episode that I'm doing right now, I was like, oh, I'll just let people know what's going on. I couldn't even do this. Literally, however long this ends up being, I just didn't have the bandwidth. With Patreon, I had scheduled to do Zooms because that's part of what I do with Patreon. We do Zooms and things like that, which is super fun. And I had to cancel that because I didn't have the bandwidth. I was barely functioning as a human being. Today, what I'm going to do is share a little bit about what I've been doing to get through all this, because I think one of the main things that I love these bite-sized bishes for is to share my experience, strength, and hope. Because, I'm a tough cookie, as my grandma always used to say. I'm a tough cookie, but it was just too much to happen in 3 weeks of time. It's too much to happen. That's like a year's worth of material. That happened in 3 weeks. I'm human, and I just got overwhelmed and I just couldn't function. And I had to take things one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. And so I'm happy to be here back on the mic, talking to you all and, just sharing what the heck has been going on. For everyone who has been so supportive, my Patreon family, people on Instagram, all of you, you know who you are, who you've listened, you've supported, you've followed since day one. Just thank you, because it honestly made such a difference. I am not joking, because as I'm about to tell you some stories, I didn't have a lot of help or support. And I think that's for me the one thing that it always comes back to, when life is hard, support matters. So to have support from you all is honestly the greatest thing that I could ever hope for. This community just, it saves my life daily. And I'm so grateful for you. And I just wanted, this is, kind of a love letter to you all as well, because if you think it doesn't matter, it does. So thank you. Watching someone you love decompensate is just it threw me for a loop, and here's why. So as I mentioned before, right, my grandmother was 96, my grandfather's 98. I'm a logical, understanding person that, you can only live so long. But what I learned, there's nothing that can prepare you for losing somebody that you love. And it's kind of funny because when I was in my practice, I would talk to people about, when we have anxiety, what we try to do is we try to prepare ourselves for things or think about things like because our brain wants to trick us into believing that we have some sort of control over what's going on when we really don't. And so, I am very well acquainted with grief. For those of you who have listened to this podcast, I've had a ton of grief in my life. I've lived with a chronic cancer and survived a cancer that I wasn't supposed to survive. It's taken my organs, my ability to have children, my hair, my body functions the way that it functions. And there's not a lot that I can do about it. And so my point is that I'm well acquainted with grief. And I remember in my practice talking to people about, when we try to say, oh, well, we're preparing for someone to die or we're preparing for this, it's just our brain's way to try to trick us into thinking that like we have some control. So my brain did the same thing. And I was like, okay, I understand what's happening. I'm so grateful for the time that we had together. And let me be clear, with my grandparents, nothing is left unsaid. Every week, I would tell them how much I love them, how grateful I am for them, how my life would be completely different if it were not for them. We would talk about old stories and things like there's nothing left unsaid, which is, again, such a gift, right? But when she passed, I was not prepared for how challenging it would be. I completely underestimated it, which I'm sure that my brain did to help me protect myself, I guess. My therapist tried to tell me, she tried to warn me, and I was just like, nah, I'll be all right. And I wasn't. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. And so I will share with you that the night before she died, my sister, my husband, and I, and my grandfather were all surrounding her and telling old stories, funny things that, throughout my 44 years with them that have happened. And she, at this point, was pretty non responsive, but every once in a while she'd smile. And I thought, okay, she hears us. And so, that night, I knew I needed to come home and get some sleep because I was dealing with a staph infection and my health. But that's the one thing my grandma would always warn me about. She would always tell me, Lissy, by the way, they called me Lissy because when I was growing up on my block, Melissa was a very popular name and there were three of us. And so everyone had a nickname, but mine was Lissy. That's the nickname that my grandparents gave me, Lissy. And my grandfather still calls me that. And she would always say, Lissy, you got to take care of yourself and stop focusing on everybody else and, blah, blah, blah. So I knew that I needed to go home and get some sleep. And so I just personally, what helped me is I talked to my ancestors, which is something I tend to do quite a bit when I'm struggling or I need help. And I just asked my ancestors to please be with her as she transitioned. And I said, if it's not too much trouble, I would love to have one last moment with her. Even though, like I said, we had said all the things, I just wanted to have one last moment. And this is hard. So I wake up in the morning, she was still alive, and I go over to her bed and she was really non-responsive. There wasn't a lot that she was saying, but when I got there, I put my hand on her head and I said, "Grammy, it's Lissy." A moment she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she smiled and I said, "I love you." And she said, "I love you too." And that was the last thing we said to each other, which was a beautiful thing. And so I held her hand as she took her last breath, which was probably the most beautiful and painful moment of my life. It's just it was such a gift, but also it was just so painful. And afterwards, after she passed, I had a lot to take care of. And, I think the hardest part is my grandfather. He's going to be 98 in 2 weeks, and we're definitely going to throw him a banger. I told him, I'm like, we're going to have cake, balloons, maybe some strippers. I don't know. Just kidding. But my grandfather has a great sense of humor, and so we try to laugh as much as we can. And, after she passed, I just had to take care of a lot of things. And, my grandmother was a tough cookie. She didn't necessarily want any services. She didn't even really want an obituary in the paper. And so I tried to follow her wishes, but also like honor her, which kind of was a tough line for me to walk. And so, after she passed, my grandfather, by the way, so for this year, they've been married 75 years, which is insane. I mean, I'll be lucky to live 75 years total. And they got to live to be old and be together for 75 years. It's absolutely amazing. And so, it's just it's been full of really beautiful moments, really hard moments, really, moments that just didn't know if I could even make it through. And so we had a private service for her, which I know she would have hated, but I just really wanted to honor her. So we did that, and my grandfather is kind of lost without her. It's like losing a limb. She always told him, John, it's time to go to the bathroom. John, it's time to do this. John, it's time to do that. And now he doesn't have that. So, he has dementia and he's been more confused. And I've been trying to manage caring for myself, doing the podcast, and caring for him, which has been really challenging too. Here's what I've learned along the way. And, I hope that helps, some of you. Number one is that, as I mentioned, I am well acquainted with grief, but what I realize is that doesn't matter at all. You can be well acquainted with grief, but losing somebody that is so important to you in your life, like a parent, a grandparent, there's no preparing for it, and there's no easy transition into that. There just isn't. So, my first lesson and reminder is that grief is the excruciating cost of love. Period. End of sentence, I guess. That is just, the more you love someone, the harder the grief is, and the more encompassing it is. And, it's funny because I'm not much of a crier. It's like a clinical thing that I work on in therapy, but I've just been letting myself cry. Like, for example, after she passed, I was cleaning out her room when I found some things and like her watch and all these other things that it just literally bitch slapped me in the face. I was like, oh, wow, this is painful and terrible. And I hate this. And I had just bought her some clothes before she died because that always made her feel better. And so I was going to return some of them. And I literally was in the store. The person who was checking me out was just really like not even making eye contact with me. And I just like blurted out that there was nothing wrong with the clothes. It's just that my grandmother just died. And I just like start crying. Literally, the person checking me out kind of like made this eek face, like kind of was like, eesh, and then just ignored me. And I was like, okay, that's perfect. So perfect. Now, listen, if that were me, my first job, by the way, I was a cashier, and I've always been a sensitive soul. So if someone was having a bad day or crying, I literally would have come across and hugged them. But, everybody's different. And I just kind of trauma dumped on this girl, and she just had no interest. And that was just kind of a funny thing. So, what I'm doing is I am looking for some of the laughter and the humor where I can, because for me, humor is life saving, and it's always been the solution to help me out in difficult times. And so then the second thing that I want to share that I've learned is that feelings aren't fatal and they're not final. So I've had some days where I am just feeling like I just cannot continue. I just cannot manage this. This is too much. I feel like I will perish. And then I get a solid night of sleep and I feel completely different the next day. So I think that if you're listening to this and you're in a situation where things are really hard right now, please remember feelings aren't fatal and they're not final. And in the same vein with this is that we have to believe in our inherent ability to manage the tough things as they come. So that's the one wonderful thing I can say about me is at this point, I totally trust and believe in my ability to get through anything that I need to get through. Like, I have my own back. I am tough. I am resilient. I'm persistent. I'm tenacious. I'm all these beautiful things, which, by the way, this has taken me years to be able to say this. When it comes to DBT skills, which is dialectical behavior therapy, and there's an acronym, it's called HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So when we are hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, that makes us more susceptible to really tough emotions. The one thing that I realized is that I was critically tired and exhausted because I wasn't getting the sleep I need due to the construction in my house. I wasn't feeding my body properly because I was so anxious and grief stricken that I just felt sick to my stomach. That's the other thing about emotions that I just wanted to touch on is that we feel them very physically in our bodies. And, for me, when I am having a lot of stress and anxiety, my gut is the first thing to just freak out, Oh, and she did, honey, for 3 weeks. She just freaked out, as Shannon might say, freaked out. So I wasn't eating properly. I was feeling lonely because I didn't have a lot of support. So that was the one thing that I wanted to share with you all is that if you are in the weeds emotionally, you need to get some sleep, drink some water, and feed your body. And I'm telling you, the next day, it'll be a whole new world. I did those things and it didn't exactly cure anything, right? It didn't bring her back. It didn't change the scenarios that I'm in. It just helped me better focus on managing these emotions as they come. Because then, I would have a good day and then I would have another hard day. And I went to the chiropractor the other day and I literally cried throughout the entire appointment. I've seen my chiropractor for probably 5 or 6 years. He's a friend. My husband grew up with him. He's a friend to both of us. And he's like, I have never seen you like this. And I'm like, I've never felt like this. It was, so foreign for me because normally I can like lock it up and keep it together. But it was just not, it was nothing I could contain. And honestly, nothing that I felt like I needed to contain. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel bad. I just was like, I'm just going to let this out when I need to. And so, sleep matters, food matters, water matters, and how we are feeling about our feelings matters. So let me explain this. I have always been of the belief you will hear therapists talk about good and bad emotions or positive and negative emotions. I don't believe in that. I don't believe any emotions are negative. I just believe that we all have a breadth of emotions that we have to experience to be human. How I frame this is that we have to befriend all parts of ourselves, the parts that we perceive as dark. The painful grief, the depression, the anger, the loneliness, whatever it is. If we befriend that and we don't make it our own personal boogeyman, that also helps. Because, as I mentioned, grief is the excruciating cost of love. And so on the other side of love is pain and all of these things when someone we love dies. And especially for me, I have to be honest, watching her take her last breath, there are images and sounds that I am having trouble getting out of my brain that are just really hard. And if you've experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into it more. That's just been hard. And at night, it kind of dive bombs my brain. In addition to befriending our emotions, kind of like imagine, like a monster in your closet and inviting the monster to come out and just lay next to you in bed, right? Because I'm sure the monster's sad too. And that's kind of what I did is I just empowered myself to say, I'm going to allow myself to feel all these things. I'm going to manage the halt stuff as much as I can. And I'm literally going to take it one day at a time. And there were some days where I'm not kidding, I took it 1 minute at a time. And that is how I got through the day. in the program of AA, the serenity prayer is grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm not particularly a religious person. I tend to be more spiritual, but for me, those are words to live by. And so honestly, that's what I've been doing. And then, the last thing is just like, this is the first time in my life, no joke, that I have put myself first. So the fact that I didn't put out a podcast for the last 2 or 3 weeks and didn't explain to anyone what was going on, like, except for my Patreon people, because that's the benefit of subscribing to my Patreon is I do post updates, videos, things like that, pictures, a little bit more personal stuff. But for me, this is a huge win. For people listening, you might be annoyed. And if you are, fair enough. I understand. That's okay for you to feel how you feel. That's okay. But for me to put myself first is truly an absolute win. And so I'll share a couple little interesting things that happened after she passed away. After ovarian cancer when I was 17, and I wasn't supposed to survive that, but I did. All I can tell you is I was just different. I had some, which I don't talk about this a lot because I feel like it makes me sound kooky, which I am a little kooky, but I started to have these abilities to kind of my empathic abilities really skyrocketed, and I had more of a psychic ability too in terms of like I would have dreams that would come true. So like for example, a dream that, my nana fell down the stairs and broke her hip and then the next day she did. So I had these premonitions, and I also then that developed into when people did pass, I would have what I would call visitations where it wasn't a dream, but they would come to me with a message. It would be clear as day. I would wake up feeling like this energy that I had, I don't know, just it's very hard to explain. After she died, I was nervous that I wasn't getting any sort of like she wasn't coming to me in dreams and we were so close. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I hope she's okay." I was just like really stressed. And the one day I talked to her every day. I said, "Graham, I don't mean to bother you while you're on a new spiritual plane because I'm sure that's hard to navigate. But can you just give me a sign and let me know that you're okay? Because I've been really stressed and worried about this." And then I started to get the most insane experiences over the next couple of days, which I'll just tell you quickly is that with the construction in our house, we've been unable to sleep in our bedroom. So we've been sleeping in other places. And I'm in this bedroom that normally I'm never in. It was a beautiful temperature here, and I had the window open because there was all this dust and stuff, and we were trying not to turn on the air, which has failed because today it's flipping 80 degrees, which that's great, but also what the hell. And so I'm laying there with the window open. And for those of you who don't know how I feel about camping, so I hate camping so much that I sincerely do not want to be buried because to me, being buried is permanent camping. And while that's funny, I'm not joking, and I'm very serious about that. So I had the window open. I was taking a picture to show my husband. Like, I just thought, I was like, oh, this is the closest I'll ever get to camping, like sleeping with an open window. I'm such a bougie bitch. And I took the picture, and it was like wacky. There were it's honestly hard to explain. So if you are a member of my Patreon, I will post these pictures and I'll also post them to my Instagram stories. So you can check those out. But it was this insane electric lightning bolt through it, and then there was like all this smoke around me. I was like, "What the heck?" And then I took another picture, and then that picture came out totally fine and normal, and I thought, "Huh, that's really weird." And so then the next day, I was sitting outside and like in my backyard, because that's one of the other things that I've been doing to like really help myself is just being in nature. Being in nature for me is very grounding because that's the irony. I hate camping, right? I don't want to sleep in nature, but I like to be there during the day. I like to be there in a comfy chair, with a big jug of ice water and my blankie or whatever, but I do like to enjoy it and walk in it and all these things. And so we have, the amazing thing about our house is that it backs up to just miles and miles and miles of woods, and it's just gorgeous. There's birds and deer and chipmunks. It's like, Snow White, basically, like birds flying around me, helping me get dressed. Just kidding. I do wish that they would do that though. And so I'm sitting out in the backyard and I'm just decompressing, and I was taking a picture of this is funny too. And this is why this is important, because both of these pictures that I took, it was just like random. It wasn't me trying to be like, Graham, are you here? Like asking for a sign. I was just taking random pictures. And our neighbors behind us, we put up all these like amazing LED lights, and we have like a projector that we use outside. I mean, our outside space is just like, it's just so dope. It's just amazing. And our neighbors, they had put up the same lights, and I was like, "This is cute." Like, I was just like taking a picture of it to show my husband, and it was the wildest picture that I've ever seen. It was just like, imagine like rays of light that are just like vertically going up and down. Like, I've showed this picture to so many people, and people are like, "I've never seen anything like this." And again, it was the first picture I took that was weird, and then the second one I took was totally normal. But here's where this gets really bizarre. We have cameras outside of our home, blink cameras that they go off when there's movement or things like that. And so I was sitting outside on my deck in a chair, and the blink camera caught the exact moment that I took that picture. And in the video, you can see a huge flash of light on the left side of my camera. Like, it's not coming from my phone. It's like on the edge of it, that as I pressed the picture, this big orb of like flash of light was like in front of my face. And I didn't see that in real life, but it showed it on the video. I was like, that's wild. And so then that night, I was like, okay, well, she's clearly giving me some signs. I'm super grateful for that. But I just felt, my problem is I tend to feel the weight of the world on my shoulders in terms of like with people I love. I've been feeling really bad for my grandfather and feeling like, I need to be there all the time, but I can't be there all the time because he doesn't need that. Like, he's not a baby. He's fine. I have stuff that I need to take care of, including myself, which he tells me all the time. So I was just laying in bed, stressing about all of it, just being like, I know she wouldn't want me to worry about this, but I just, can't stop. And so I eventually fell asleep. And that next morning I woke up, and I'm not joking. There was a dead bird in the middle of my front porch. Literally, it looked like it just fell out of the sky and landed there. And it wasn't hurt, there was nothing wrong with it. I mean, that I could see, like, maybe it hit a window or something, I have no idea, but the point of it is that I used AI. I'm like, significance of dead bird on a porch, and it was basically like that a dead bird on your porch represents grief, transitions, new beginnings, and it can also be a warning to make sure you take better care of yourself. And I was like, "Okay, well, this is Graham, right?" She would always tell me in life, "Lissy, you have to be careful you have to take care of yourself. You can't just be taking care of everybody else." And I swear to you, after that, I went out in the backyard and I said, "Listen, Graham," I said, "I understand. Hear your messages. I see your signs. Thank you so much for that. I love you and I appreciate you. If this is too much energy and it's too hard, please do not stick around for me. Please do not, go wherever you need to go." And since that day, I have not felt her or gotten another sign or weird picture. So I just, that's it's just been a lot for me to process, some in beautiful ways, some in very painful ways. But one thing I know for sure is that I feel, lucky to have had these relationships with these people for so long. I'm grateful that my grandfather is still here. I am grateful that I have a good medical team to help me figure stuff out that is way beyond my understanding. I am grateful for a very supportive husband, for the Bish community at large, for some very, very close friends who have been ride or dies for me. And I am very grateful. I'm just grateful today. So I thought this was a perfect day to put this episode out for you all and share a little bit about what's been going on and how I've been managing it. And I hope sincerely that this has helped. I know that there are people listening to this who are going through very tough stuff right now. So I hope that what I've shared has been helpful. And it really is true that, the old adage, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. That really is true. And it's just finding a good balance for me, which sometimes feels impossible. But this whole scenario has honestly helped me with that too. So it's been a wild experience. And so the last part that I'll share with you is that for right now, I have to take a break from the podcast. It is just not feasible for me to do this. By the way, I am 3 episodes behind on OC and Miami because, to be honest, I couldn't care less about that, and I just I've not been watching Bravo. I haven't even been on Instagram. My following probably dropped to half of what it was, and honestly, I don't even care. I don't care. For the first time in my life, it's really about like what's best for me, and I hope you all understand that, and I'm sure that you do. So, this is what the plan is. I am taking a temporary break from the podcast. My house, at the very least, my bathroom, the construction has to be finished. My house has to be back in order. And I have to figure out some health stuff before I can even move forward. So, my sincere hope is that in 4 weeks, I'll be back. I'll be back. In 4 weeks, hopefully, my bathroom will be done. I'll have a better understanding of my CLL and what's happening there and what I need to do about that. And I'll just have had more practice managing and coping, and I'll be a little bit further removed from all that as well. I am going to cover I'm going to go back to covering OC in Miami. I am going to cover Salt Lake City as that comes back this week. I'm going to get back to posting clinical interpretations on my Instagram because, again, I didn't even have the bandwidth to do that. That's the thing too. I have to say this is that grief brain for me has new meaning. I just keep saying that I have grief brain, which means that I'm forgetting words. I'm not as eloquent and well spoken as I normally am. It kind of feels like I have dementia, but I know that I don't. And so that's also something that I wanted to share with people is that if you're feeling like you're under a lot of stress and your brain is different, it probably is temporarily. But the good news is that all these things that I've shared helps rewire our brains towards coping, towards, developing new neurotransmitters and new pathways and things like that in positive and healthy ways. So there is something we can do. That's the good news. And so it's A, tolerating it, B, acknowledging it, and C, taking it day by day and just doing the best you can. But my brain, that's the main thing is like, I am known for, I can be a good writer and a good speaker and all these things. And the last couple weeks I've just been like, I don't know. I've been Shannon. That's what I've been. So this week, as long as I have the mental capacity, I will cover Salt Lake City on my Instagram. And as a special thank you to you all, I am going to record an episode that should be coming out on Tuesday or Wednesday with Amy Phillips about Unknown Number, this like huge catfish scandal. It was on Netflix. And what's funny is Amy had texted me about, do you want to cover this? And I told her what's been going on. She was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, no, but this would actually be good because it's a series on Netflix about these 2 teenagers who were cyberbullied for like 2 years. And then it ended up being like a wild situation when you find out what's going on. And when I was deep in my grief, I watched that to kind of distract myself because that's another technique that can be really helpful when you're really struggling is distraction. And I couldn't watch Bravo because to me now Bravo feels like work, unfortunately. That's just part of this gig, right? It feels like a job. So I was like, I don't want to watch OC. I don't want to watch Miami. I don't want to watch anything. And so I watched this. And when Amy texted me that, I was like, hell yeah, I am totally in. So the good news is, in addition to this episode, there's going to be another episode with Amy where I give my clinical interpretations on this wacky Netflix series it's called Unknown Caller, Unknown Number. And it's like the catfishing scandal, something like that, because I'm very excited to talk about it. And when I watched it, I thought to myself, I really want to cover this. And then my brain was like, bitch, please, you don't have the bandwidth for nothing. So when I do a collab with Amy, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit more helpful. And so that is going to be the last episode for the season for you all. I'm also going to do an M&M hour with Mandy that is going to post to my Patreon. And I'll probably post it publicly when I come back. But so here's my point. Thank you for understanding my little hiatus. If you want to hear me during my breaks, go over to Patreon, www.patreon.com/yourbishtherapist, where I post extra bonus content. I will talk about OC, like I said, in Salt Lake City. I'll post the M&M Hour, full video, ad-free, early release, all these other things. So check that out if you're interested in that. And if not, that's okay. Thank you for all the ways that you support me. I appreciate each and every single one of you. And my hope is to be back in 4 to 6 weeks. And if that changes, I will do another episode and let people know, because for me, this is a relationship that I have with you all. Like, this is not just like, I'm not Oz. I'm not just like talking into a mic. There's real people, you all, on the other end of this, that I'm very grateful for. And so it's not that I owe you an explanation, but I want you to know what's going on, and to be aware and to not just think I'm flaking or something like that. So this is going to be it for me today. This ended up being a much longer episode than I anticipated. Thank you for listening to everything that I've had to say. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your understanding. Like I said, it means the world. So please check out Your Bish Therapist on Instagram. Please check me out on Patreon. You can even join as a free member. Most of the stuff that I do is for paid members, but I do some things for free members as well. And to be honest, I have no idea what lies ahead for me, but as soon as I know, you'll know. And the one thing that I know for sure is I'm going to be fine. I'm going to persist, and I'm going to take the lessons, and I'm going to be just fine, and I'm going to have hard days in between. So I just thank you all for listening, sending love to you and yours, and ta-ta for now. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.